Hello, welcome to the American Writers Museum. My name is Gary Cranston. I see attendees starting to stream into the audience, and we have two special guests with us tonight. For those of you who are new to the American Writers Museum, we are downtown at Michigan and Lake. We had been closed for a while, and our programming is all virtual and online right now, but we are reopened. The museum is open Wednesdays through Sundays from 10 to 5. So please come down and visit us. If you're interested in finding out more about the American Writers Museum, you can also visit our website at americanwritersmuseum.org. We do our programming on a regular basis from, on average, once a week. If you're interested in programs and things that you see tonight and other programs we have coming up, we have another program tomorrow night with Kathleen Rooney. And we have some new programs that are coming up that you can find on our website as well. So if you're interested in the museum, we also encourage folks to become members if they're really enjoying what they're seeing here. But with all of that said, I am going to hand over tonight's program to our two special guests. Roberta Rubin is a founding board member of the American Writers Museum, a longtime bookseller and a longtime book aficionado, and a great supporter of writers and the writerly arts. And with her tonight is her good friend Michael Lewis, Dr. Michael Lewis, who has written his new book about his life with some amazing people like Michael Jordan and a whole host of others. And they are going to have a talk tonight about that product and that wonderful book and what went into it. So I'm handing it over now to Roberta Rubin and Michael Lewis, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to our conversations on writing tonight, and to meet my wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Lewis. He is the writer of the book, The Balls in Your Court. I want to hold it up like this, but I know you'll see it in the next few minutes. But it's The Balls in Your Court, a doctor shares life lessons from Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson, Abraham Maslow, and other inspiring teachers. Michael is brilliant, scholarly, a highly respected orthopedic surgeon in Chicago, as well as one who just leads life to its fullest. And he has a passion, a sense of adventure, and a love for all the experiences he has had. I just have to quote something my mother-in-law used to say all the time, and that is, he is smart like two colleges. I never knew why two, not one, but he's smart like two colleges. So this is the story of all the superstars in Michael's life, and he being one of them in either sports or medicine or academics. Welcome, Michael, and I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Roberta, for that very generous, overly generous introduction. I'd like to, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this program tonight. I love the Writers Museum. I've been there many times. I was there just this past weekend. It's a very special place. And almost 20 years ago, I had just self-published a book, and I had heard about a very influential bookstore owner, one of the most influential bookstore owners in the country, who was right here in Winnetka, Illinois. So I just walked into her bookstore, and she had a little office in the back piled to the ceiling with books. And I showed her my humble offering, and she said, every day people come in with books and I tell them this is not good enough, go back and try again. But I really like this book. I'm going to help you out in any way that I can. I'm going to carry this book in your bookstore. And she has just been such a good friend and so encouraging ever since. So thank you so much, Roberta, for everything you do for the Writers Museum and what you've done for me.
Thank you. All right. I think, are you going to take charge and show us a video?
Yes.
We'll start out.
The format
having
is that I'll start with a presentation with a video, and then some of my photographs sharing life lessons that I've learned that are in the book. So let's go ahead and start. The video lasts 1 minute. So that video includes many of the life lessons in the book, and it also includes a quote from my amazing 103-year-old mother. So in this time of the pandemic, I know many of us are feeling very much like this bullfighter in Madrid, Spain, or this rodeo rider holding on for dear life, or we might be feeling rather hostile and upset like these two polar bears in northern Canada. But I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, we'll start to feel more sanguine and tranquil, and best case scenario, like these Magellanic penguins in the Falkland Islands. So why should anyone pay any attention to a country doctor from Houston, Texas? And one answer is that I've been extraordinarily fortunate in my life to be in the right place at the right time. And this is Abraham Maslow, who I studied with in college, who is the father of American psychology. As an orthopedic surgeon, I studied with Sir John Charnley, pictured here, who invented the hip replacement. And as I'm sure many of you know, several million people have benefited from his surgery. I was fortunate to be one of the first people in the Midwest to perform knee arthroscopic surgery. And I very much was in the right place at the right time when our office became the doctor for the Chicago White Sox and then the Chicago Bulls. And I was incredibly fortunate to win 2 championship rings with the Chicago Bulls. So this is a gentleman that I've learned many life lessons from. Once upon a time, many years ago, back in the 1990s, this gentleman, Michael Jordan, gave us all such joy, and I was enjoying the ride just like everyone else. And then one night in a playoff game in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1998, Michael Jordan went up for a rebound and was poked in the eye, and blood started pouring out of his eye. So he and I walked off the court together, and I had a decision to make. Do I suture this cut on his eyelid, which would have closed the wound and stopped the bleeding, but might have meant that he couldn't return to the game? Or do I steri-strip the wound, which meant that he could have returned, but the bleeding could have started up again? The steri-strips might not have held. So I saw the headlines in my mind's eye in the Tribune the next day. Bulls lose playoff, Michael Lewis drops the ball. So I did choose to steri-strip the wound, and I held my breath for the remainder of the game, and fortunately the steri strips held. But it was a powerful lesson for me, a lesson in humility, because I was very fortunate. And a lesson was, you can do everything right, but the results may not work out the way you had hoped for. So it's important just to keep plugging away. Another example is, this is Shizuki Arakawa, who won the Olympic gold medal in figure skating in 2008. It was estimated that during her many years of training, she fell 20,000 times. But the important lesson here is that she got up 20,000 times. Bill Winnington taught another very powerful life lesson. Just before the playoffs in 1997, he sustained a severe injury to his foot, and I had to be the one to tell him that the injury was so severe that he wouldn't be able to participate in the playoffs that year. And of course he was upset, but his reaction was, I've been so fortunate all my life, and I've had 10 great years in the NBA, and most people are only in the NBA for 3 or 4 years. So I feel very fortunate. And to me, that was a very powerful lesson in how to handle adversity. And one lesson that I try to teach my students and children and grandchildren is, a test of your character is not how you behave when things are going well, but how you behave in times of adversity. Another lesson I learned, this is Carlton Fisk, who was with the Chicago White Sox when I was with the team. And Michael Jordan in basketball and Carlton Fisk in baseball were the two most talented athletes I knew. And what was interesting to me is that they were the two hardest working athletes. So giving people more than they expect, to me, was another very important life lesson. So why do I have a picture of a gorilla on the screen? It illustrates one of my favorite quotes that's very appropriate in the time of the pandemic. Success is like wrestling a gorilla. You don't quit when you're tired, you quit when the gorilla is tired. Another variation on the theme, as far as controlling your attitude, is you can't stop the pandemic, you can't stop the waves, but you can try to learn to deal with them. You can try to learn how to surf. And since I have grandchildren living on Maui, here's one grandchild and my son-in-law learning how to surf, and another grandson learning how to surf. This gentleman is DeWitt Jones. DeWitt Jones is a National Geographic photographer who lives on the island of Molokai, and I had the privilege of visiting him there. And I highly recommend his TED Talk, which is titled Celebrate What's Right with the World. But one of the life lessons that I learned from DeWitt Jones is there's more than one right answer for most situations. So for example, when I was traveling in Namibia, which is a country in Southern Africa, this was a photograph of these sand dunes, which are the largest sand dunes in the world. And this was one right answer. This was a photograph from an airplane. And then at the moment of daybreak, we climbed to the top of this dune, and for only 3 minutes, the sun's rays struck at this angle. So this was another right answer. And then we climbed back down and I took this photograph at ground level. So this was another right answer. And then we moved further back and took this photograph from this dead lake with petrified trees. So in photography and in so many situations, there's more than one right answer. And as DeWitt teaches us, we should celebrate what's right with the world. This is my amazing 103-year-old mother, And this was at a recent birthday with two of her granddaughters surprising her. And I'm showing this picture of my mother because I'm certainly the last person on earth to minimize the significance of this terrible pandemic. But we have overcome obstacles before. It's important to keep things in perspective. So, for example, during my mother's lifetime, World War I, the pandemic flu of 1918, where more than 50 million people died, the stock market crash, World War II, multiple wars. So we have overcome serious catastrophes in the past. Another life lesson, along with the fact that we can control our attitude to a large extent, is not to forget our sense of humor. One of Michael Jordan's qualities is he had a wonderful sense of humor. For example, one night he was asked, it was Dennis Rodman's birthday, and he was asked if he got a present for Dennis. And he said he didn't think he could go into those places from where Dennis might want a birthday present. So you have a choice with hair colors with Dennis. You can choose red or yellow or green or white and red or red and black or multiple colors. And why am I showing pictures of Dennis Rodman? To illustrate a point about adjusting attitude, and Dennis was able to adjust his attitude. Specifically, I was treating him for an injury, and 2 weeks into the injury, he was paying precious little advice to my wise counsel. And just by accident, I overheard Dennis talking to Steve Kerr, one of the other players, about this woman, Janis Joplin, the rock star. So I chimed in and mentioned that I'd heard Dennis Rodman, or heard Janis Joplin in concert in San Francisco many years before. So Dennis suddenly perked up, and you could see the wheels turning. And clearly he thought that if I had been cool enough to hear Janis Joplin in concert, maybe my advice was worth listening to. Maybe my medical IQ was higher than he thought. So he started paying attention, and I'm happy to report that he recovered and helped the Bulls win their 5th championship. Another very important lesson is to bolster your own health. You can start by helping others. This is my friend Jeffrey Tabin, a professor of ophthalmology at Stanford, and my wife and I were fortunate to visit him while he was performing cataract surgery, several hundred cataract surgeries in Ghana. And all of the proceeds from my books go to this extraordinarily worthy cause, the Himalayan Cataract Project, because for $25 an eye, $50 for 2 eyes, you can restore sight to someone who has been blind for years. Here was a patient who literally had been blind for years, and this was the very moment when he could see for the first time in years. It's just one of the most miraculous things on earth. So the final lesson in this presentation that I want to leave you with is that the crisis can bring out the best in people. We can rise to the occasion. So it's very important for us to ask, what can I do to make the situation better? This is a poster that's in the back of the book that has many of these life lessons that we've been talking about. And I'm hoping that at the end of this presentation, you'll feel more like this snowy owl. So,
Okay, very nice.
Thank you.
Michael, very nice.
Thank you.
I want to tell everyone there is a Q&A section. On my computer, on my iPad, it's at the top, and some it's at the bottom. but feel free to ask your questions, and we will assemble them and talk about it at the end of the program. Very well done, Michael. Also, so much of it is in the book. So if you want to grab on to one of the life lessons that you heard and were particularly interested in, go to the book, The Ball's in Your Court. So now I will ask some questions, and the audience can certainly do a Q&A. I guess I'm impressed that you were able to write this book at the time that The Last Dance was being produced, and everybody was again focused on Michael Jordan. And I think it's even incredible. How did you get the cover? How were you able to get the cover, The Ball's in Your Court, with Michael Jordan? Was that difficult?
Well, there were two ways to do that. One would be to pay Michael Jordan several $1 million, or the other way would be if you happen to know the Bulls photographer, Bill Smith, who was the photographer at the time, who had the copyright to several images. So that's how that came about. So I was very fortunate to be able to have that image on the cover.
Right. What are some of the experiences that you watched Michael go through, or you had with Michael, that we don't know about?
Well, there are many experiences that I mention in the book that people don't really know about Michael Jordan. One, I'll give you an example. One night, 10 minutes before a game was about to start, he had such severe neck pain that he couldn't move his neck in any direction. And I suggested that he consider not playing that night. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, fans have come from hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles to see me, and I can't disappoint them. And so his commitment to the game, his commitment to his fans was I think an underappreciated quality of his. Everyone knows about his overwhelming desire to win, but that was one of his lesser known, I think, remarkable qualities. Another quality was his extraordinary ability to focus, to block out distractions. To me, one very potent example was he and I were in the training room before a game was about to start, and the TV in the room suddenly showed the alleged killers. His father was murdered in a robbery, and so the killers were being taken into court. And Michael looked at me and just shrugged his shoulders. And I took that as a sign that he loved his father very, very much. His father was his best friend, but he knew that he couldn't he knew that he couldn't bring his father back, so he just completely blocked out the distractions of his father's killers. Another example of his self-control was the fact that in 10 years, more than 10 years in front of the media every night, he never once said something that he really regretted. That's really quite remarkable. Those were some of his other qualities that people don't talk about so much.
What was the reaction about your book? Came out right after The Last Dance, right?
Yes.
So did that get some recognition, your book, because of the TV presentation?
Well, I think it was very generous of ESPN to spend several $1 million to help publicize my book. But I can tell you my reaction to the Last Dance. I thought it was a wonderful nostalgia trip for all of us to bring us back to that magical time. But I thought that it was very unfair to Jerry Krause, the general manager. Jerry, in his own way, was as important to the team as anyone else, as Coach Phil Jackson or any of the players, because he was the one that hired Phil Jackson. He discovered Scottie Pippen. He brought in Dennis Rodman. But at the same time, he was a public relations disaster. He wasn't a people person, so it was easy to treat him as the evil empire. But I will tell you one story that to me illustrated his remarkable perfectionism. One night during a playoff game, I saw him leaving the United Center, the stadium where the Bulls played, with his bags packed. I said, Jerry, where are you going? And he said he was going to Europe to scout a player. So I said, Jerry, it's the playoffs, as if he didn't know that. And he said, I said, why don't you just watch a tape of the player? And he said he was flying to Europe to watch the player's body language when he was on the bench and not playing. So to me, that was a really powerful example of his level of perfectionism.
And you picked up on that. Good. My last question about the 10 years with the Bulls and the White Sox, but I guess the question is the highlights of the June 1997 game, which everyone who was in Chicago remembers that moment when Michael Jordan hit the basket.
Right. Well, that particular night, it was it's the opening chapter in the book, and it was the sixth game with against the Utah Jazz. And I got there 2 hours early to just sort of soak up the atmosphere. And I was sitting in the stands, and believe it or not, there was someone down the row from me 2 hours before the game practicing his heckling. He was saying, go back to Utah, go back to Utah. And then I got extremely nervous and panicky because when Utah came out 2 hours before the game and started practicing their shots, they were hitting 90% of their shots. So I thought, there's no way that the Bulls have a chance to win. But the closer it came to game time, that percentage went way down, because even the battle-tested teams, the pressure got to them. And then later that night, I was sitting on the bench and overheard Phil Jackson barking orders to the players. So I was in the dual role of being a crazed fan as well as the orthopedic consultant for the team that night. And then I found myself at the end of the game being sprayed with champagne in the winning locker room. So it was one of the great nights.
Great moments. Wonderful. Well, before I leave that whole experience, I would like to focus on Phil Jackson quite a bit, or somewhat, because he plays a major role in your book. And I also thought I'd like to hear your take and your answers to how did he motivate his players?
Well, Phil Jackson, I learned a lot from observing Phil Jackson and talking with Phil Jackson. One quality that he had that I think was very important that made him a great leader was his credibility. He had won championships with the New York Knicks as a player. Also, he'd overcome adversity himself because he'd had back spinal fusion surgery as a player. So he had dealt with adversity. And also he had been a coach and then an assistant coach for many years. So he paid his dues. So credibility was one key part of his leadership. Secondly, he was very insightful and very intuitive and very empathetic. And he knew just which buttons to push for each player. For example, in one of the medical meetings, he stated that one of the players seemed a bit sort of down on himself. So he said that he was going to give that player more minutes to sort of boost his morale. But he knew just what buttons to push for each individual player. And he also knew which buttons to push for the team as a whole. There were so many distractions. It really was like traveling with the Beatles. There were thousands of people everywhere we went. And to be able to keep the team focused during this long, grueling season was a remarkable accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Has he read the book? Have you kept in touch with
I haven't kept in touch with him recently, but I'll try to reach out to him.
Right. I just wondered about that. All right. Well, that's as long as we're still in sports. You talk a lot about Bill Veeck. Veeck is in Wreck. And he was an unforgettable character. His wife was a writer also and wrote a book about him. What was your great love affair with Bill Veeck? I know that you admired him so.
Well, I was so fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time with Bill Veeck. And Bill Veeck was the owner for the Chicago White Sox during the late 70s. And Bill Veeck had a wooden leg, and he had carved out a hole in this wooden leg. And the first time I saw him put out his cigarette and use that hole as an ashtray, my eyes almost popped out of my head. He was such an amazing character. He was so creative. He once showed me a box of hundreds of index cards, each with individual ideas on them. He invented the exploding scoreboard. He invented the idea of putting players' names on the back of their uniforms and taking a bow after a home run. He was just such an extraordinarily creative man. But one of the qualities that I admired so much about him was he was so comfortable with himself that he made everyone around him more comfortable. And I've really tried to aspire to that quality. He was very comfortable around the average fan. He was comfortable around other owners. He was comfortable around the medical staff, the players, the sports writers. He just made everyone feel comfortable. And he also had a wonderful sense of humor. One story that he told me was that he had been the owner for the St. Louis Browns many years before, when they had the lowest attendance in the league. And one day, someone called the box office and he answered the phone, even though he was the owner of the team. And this person inquired about the matinee the next day. And the person inquired what time the matinee started. And Bill Veeck said, "Well, how many people in your party?" And the person responded, 6. So Bill Veeck said, "Well, what time would be convenient for you?" So, just a wonderful example of his sense of humor.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay, let's start at the beginning, because as I was reading the book and hearing all these fabulous stories and the quotes and your understanding of what you were working with and doing, I began to think, now, where did Michael come from? Wait, he came from Houston, Texas. How did that all evolve? I mean,
you'll have to speak to my parents about how that evolved. But one thing I'd mentioned before about being in the right place at the right time, and we could do several hours about Houston, Texas, and these. But one of the thoughts that I have about being in the right place at the right time is that at that time, growing up in the late 50s, it was a given that if you studied hard and made good grades in school, there would be a good job waiting for you. And obviously, that's not always been the same since. Also, tuition at that time, tuition, room, and board, even at a private school, was $1,000 a year. So these mountains of student debt were not part of the picture then. So coming from that era in Houston, Texas at that time, to me was an example of being in the right place at the right time. Being very
well, and you mentioned you in one of your quotes at the beginning of the book, Mary Oliver, a favorite and a famous poet, said, "Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." And I think you're the embodiment of what she was expressing, and particularly your story about leaving Houston and going on.
Well, thank you. I've tried to compensate for lack of talent with enthusiasm.
Oh, come on.
I think about Clarence Day, the writer who wrote Fathers Knows Best. One of his famous quotes that I love, and it's at the end of the book, is you can't sweep other people off their feet unless you can be swept off your own. So I've just always been blessed to feel enthusiastic about the remarkable people that I've met, and being so fortunate to be in the right places at the right times.
Mm-hmm. Is that why you decided to write the book? Is that you wanted to have you knew you wanted to have the experiences and you just set out to do it?
Well, originally the book was simply going to be some notes for grandchildren, but a lesson that I learned from my experience with Bill Veeck was that I didn't keep a diary at that time. And then when I had the opportunity to be with the Bulls, I did keep a diary. And when I rediscovered the diary about a year ago, I realized that this was really a unique perspective, because I had very close relationships with the players and the coaches and the general manager. And I knew many of the things that interested me, I thought would be interesting to other people, and that they would want to, that I could share some of those life lessons with them.
Mm-hmm. I did not know a lot about Abraham Maslow, the founder of American psychiatry, but I certainly learned in the book about Abraham Maslow, and I loved his idea of being there and the important influence in your life. Talk about him a little. You mentioned him in the video, but
yes. Well, Abraham Maslow came up with a very, at the time, very radical idea. When I was studying psychology in the early 1960s, the field was dominated by Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud studied people who were psychotic and neurotic, and formed a theory of how we behave and what motivates us based on studying those people. Maslow came up with the idea of, let's look at the people in the world that we most admire and see what qualities they have. And he did that, and he called those people self-actualized. And I, at the time, was a very insecure, directionless college student who was obsessed with self-improvement. So I latched on to this idea. And I've actually written a book called Seeing More Colors, which each chapter is one of Maslow's self-actualized qualities. So for example, one of the qualities that self-actualized people possess is creativity. And he famously said that a first-rate soup is better than a second-rate poem. And that greatly expanded my ideas of creativity, because I always thought that being creative was creating a poem or painting a painting. And he expanded the idea that raising a family or starting a business or continuing a business or repairing an automobile all were different forms of creativity. So that was a very powerful lesson. Also, thinking for yourself, not just following other people. One of my favorite quotes in the book was from Oscar Wilde: "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." So I loved
That is one, exactly.
I loved that quote. And one example in my life was, I mentioned Jeffrey Tabin, who's done many, many thousands of cataract surgeries. And when I compared myself to Jeffrey Tabin, I realized that I could never reach thousands of people. So I compared to Jeffrey, I felt very inadequate. And then I realized that I could still reach one person at a time. I could only be myself. Everyone else was already taken. So that actually gave me a great comfort in following Maslow's idea.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
also,
I recall correctly, Maslow suggested that you become a psychiatrist.
That's correct.
And I hear all these quotes and your understanding of self-actualization, which I have now too absorbed and tried to think about. But why didn't you become a psychiatrist? Why a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon?
Well, I actually went to medical school because Abraham Maslow told me to do that. He said, you can make a difference in the field of psychiatry. So if the great man tells you something, you listen. So I went to medical school thinking I'd be a psychiatrist. And on my psychiatry rotations, I had these wonderful experiences. The patients said that you've explained things so well. I never saw things so clearly. And so I was on cloud 9 coming out of those sessions, but there was only one problem. To my disappointment, the following week, these patients hadn't made a complete 180-degree personality change, and I wasn't mature enough to handle the lack of tangible results. So I literally went into orthopedic surgery because if a hip joint was worn out, you could replace it. If a wrist was broken, you could set it. I wasn't mature enough to have the delay of seeing the results.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Your book has a great pace, Michael. I couldn't put it down. I really just kept reading and waiting for the next discovery you were going to embark on or adventure. And a resident said something that I just have written down in my quote, for my quote. He said, I caught a spark from your ever spinning wheel. And I love that. That was your curiosity, your desire to keep doing well. And the book expresses that.
Well, I think that quote says more about the person who wrote it than about me. But that was really a high point, having the feeling that you're really connecting with, as a teacher, and being a physician is just such a privilege. Getting that kind of positive feedback. Patients send notes saying, "You've given me my life back. You're a miracle worker." It's just been such a glorious career. I just feel so honored to be a physician.
All right. I see that our time is marching on, but I have questions. What qualities would you say you possessed that have helped you to become successful? Now, you have said, staying with it and sparking the wheel. I've heard some of that, but you have been very, very successful. And you can give Abraham Maslow some of the credit, but not all of it.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out how to be successful, but I think, as I've said in our discussion tonight, so much truly is being in the right place at the right time, and being blessed with a curiosity gene. Albert Einstein famously said that he didn't have talent, but he had great curiosity. And no one has ever confused me with Albert Einstein, except when I need a haircut. But I also have been very curious. And so I've always tried to find mentors and to try to learn lessons from those mentors.
Right.
And also,
I wrote down a few of the ways I thought you were so successful, and you're right, being in the right place at the right time, curiosity, and then I do love that Mary Oliver quote. Again, I'm going to mention it: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Your enthusiasm, sweeping people off their feet, accepting responsibility, taking the challenge. Did you have any pause when you were asked to be the team doctors, or did you jump into it with enthusiasm?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
I was terrified, but I jumped in with enthusiasm. And one quality that I didn't mention that I think is absolutely critical is grit.
I was that's my next line, Michael. What about grit?
For example, you're asking about when I became the doctor for the Bulls. I literally got up at 3:30 every morning and read everything I could get my hands on for several hours before I went to, started the day, reading about things related to basketball and sports medicine. But also in writing the book, grit played a very important role. I was very fortunate to find an editor whose name was Jamie Malinowski. Jamie Malinowski had been an editor for Time magazine, and then he was the managing editor for Playboy for 4 years, and he was just tough as nails. And so I would submit my manuscript to him, and he would send it back and say, "This is not good enough. This is too academic. It's too stilted. I need more emotion." So I would write it again, send it back to him. He'd send it back to me over and over and over again. And it was just grit more than anything else, that I wasn't going to be discouraged, and I just kept writing. And then finally one day he said, "Well, okay, it's a little bit better." So that was a great day for me.
Okay. Well, I see we have 10 Q&A questions that the audience has asked, and I've pulled it up. I'll read, I don't know exactly, I guess I'll read Suzanne Brent was the first one. Why do some people just seem to have more natural resiliency than other people? Some struggle just to get up in the morning while others excel under pressure. Is there some innate ability to remain positive in a crisis? Thank you.
Well, that's a fascinating question and could be a several-hour conversation. One interesting part of that is that we're born with a certain genetic makeup. And there are categories such as dandelion children, which are children who are resilient, and orchid children who need more specific care and feeding and are more sensitive. I was blessed to be born with an optimism gene. Others are not. So a certain amount is in your genetic makeup, but all of us can learn to be more positive. That's one of the lessons that I tried to convey in the book, that all of us have the capacity to adjust our attitude, that we don't have to respond in a given way, that in this pandemic, we don't have to say, woe is me. We can say, what can I do to make things better?
Right. You talk about a gratitude attitude in the book, if I remember, and you keep a gratitude journal.
Yes.
I started to do that, picking up from the book.
Wonderful. Well, my 103-year-old mother, I quote her in the book, and I quoted her on the video saying, I'm grateful I can be grateful. And she's been saying that for all of her life, but in every self-help book you read now talks about the importance of gratitude. And if you just think about 5 things that you're grateful for, or 3 things, or 1 thing every day, that changes your emphasis.
We have a lot of questions. Let's go through them as quickly as we can. Is it true that Michael learned many of his early life lessons from his cousin Jeff Lewis? Jeff Lewis is asking this. That's a question from Jeff.
Yes, most of my life lessons came from my cousin Jeff.
Okay. Linda Dunleavy, who works for the museums, asks, who are your influences as a writer? Do you read a lot of other sports writing?
Well, if you look in the back of the book, there's a 5 pages of bibliography. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of books on sports. And I'm also a member of a book club that I've been a member of for more than 20 years. And every month we read serious books. So I've always been a serious reader. So I would say there's not one particular writer, but it's the combination of being a serious reader and having had the remarkable opportunity of traveling to all 7 continents has certainly expanded my horizons.
Okay, Kay Nelson has 2 questions. I see a picture of a bass player on your bookshelf. Who is it, and were they a patient?
That's very observant. That bass player is L.D. Young, who was a patient of mine and a friend of mine, who sadly passed away. He was a member of the Ramsey Lewis Trio. And I mention in the book, this was one of my great moments in medicine. He had a beautiful singing voice. And I was actually performing surgery on him under local anesthesia. And he started singing "The Very Thought of You," and I chimed in. So while I was operating on him, we sang a duet together.
Oh my goodness!
So that was my one great.
How many surgeons could say that? You've been Kay also. wanted to
ahead.
know, you've been silent on Pippin. What can you say about him?
Well, no, there's a whole chapter in the book on Scottie Pippen.
Yes, yes.
I treated Scottie Pippen, one of the most dramatic moments in my time with the Bulls was having to tell Scottie during a playoff game against Miami in 1997 that he had, after he sustained a foot injury, that he couldn't go back into the game. And I arranged for he and I to travel to New York for Dr. William Hamilton and I to perform surgery on his foot, which I'm pleased to report was very successful. And Dr. Hamilton had operated on Charles Oakley, who has been with the Chicago Bulls, and so many famous people, Baryshnikov and a lot of famous dancers. So when we went into Dr. Hamilton's office the next morning, Scottie was a great practical joker. So there was a picture of Charles Oakley on the Dr. Hamilton's wall. So I told Scottie that he should tell Dr. Hamilton that he would send him a picture thanking him for the surgery, but only if he would put it on top of Charles Oakley's picture.
Okay, we have people who know you, like, how important are your cousins in your life journey? This is from cousin Ken Waldman.
Cousin Ken and cousin Jeff Lewis are tied for being the major influences in my life.
Good. Okay. Hi, Dr. Lewis. It's a treat to listen to your stories. This is from Iris Oakman. It's a treat to listen to your stories and remember years back when I worked in your office in Skokie. You have accomplished so much over the years since the Skokie days. It's good to see you. Just can't believe we both have grandchildren. Best of luck with the new book. Iris Oakman.
Very nice.
Okay, there's Ivan Kane. Besides Michael Jordan, who was your favorite Bulls player? Besides Carlton Fisk, who was your favorite White Sox player?
My favorite, there's a chapter in the book on Brian Williams, also known as Bison Deli. And Brian and I had a very interesting relationship. He was with the Bulls for a very short time, but he was a remarkable person. He ran with the Bulls in Pamplona. He traveled all over the world. He played multiple musical instruments. He had a pilot's license, and he asked me to go flying with him. And he tragically died in a boating accident. But he and I actually formed a very close bond. I am still in touch with Bill Winnington today. And my another favorite Chicago White Sox player is Wilbur Wood, the famous knuckleball pitcher, and I'm still in contact with him. I just spoke to him last week.
Okay. Penelope Dong writes, thank you, Dr. Lewis, for your wonderful talk. I love your discussion about the great qualities of so many amazing people. You mentioned Maslow's idea of self-actualization. Can you explain more about it? Well, you have, and you don't have time. I'm sorry. Is there any relationship or line of development between Jung and Maslow? And she wants to say thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, Jung greatly influenced Maslow, but that's for our next hour's discussion.
Good. Malcolm O'Hagan, the founder of the museum from Washington, D.C., writes, inspiring presentation. I'm ready to take on the world, which he already has done, but he's going to do more, I guess. Many thanks, Michael and Roberta. Okay.
Well, I heard him at a American Writers Museum benefit, and he's an extremely inspiring person, as you know,
He
Roberta.
definitely is. Look at what he's created. Creative person. Kevin Brown, what advice do you have for someone who is a late bloomer starting a new career in midlife post-COVID-19?
Oh, that's a big.
That's a big question. I'll save
question.
that question for you. How did you come up with the book title? You share many lessons from yourself and those you've encountered. What led you to this title? This is Stephen Friedberg asking.
Stephen Friedberg is another relative, and he's tied for third with the most influential people. And actually, I spent a lot of time working on the title, and the idea was combining basketball with taking the ball being in your court and assuming responsibility and taking responsibility for your own life. The ball is in your court. So it was a play on words and both trying to combine both of those elements.
Okay. Well, I think that might be a good place to end. I will save all the other questions and you can probably get back to them in some way. I want to say thank you so much, Michael, for being here, for your personality, for your contribution to the world of sports, medicine, academia. You're a very impressive friend of mine. And thank you. And to repeat what is also in the front of the book, which is the Navajo chant, I will end saying, remember what you have seen, because everything forgotten returns to the circling winds. And I love that quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. It's an honor to count you as a friend of mine.